Okay. Okay. So we're meant to be reclaiming our appetites here. This sentence is said by one of the characters of Supper Club, a novel about a secret food club created by women, where they gather to eat together without restraint. To choose the verb to reclaim in the club's very first session places appetite on a political ground. But why would a woman need to reclaim her appetite? What is so transgressive about eating? Trying to answer these questions led me to explore this topic in my master's dissertation in food studies, which forms the basis of the work I'm presenting today. This novel, along with other representations of women eating that we will look at later, challenge a historical narrative that has demanded of women self-control, moderation, or the denial of their appetite. These restrictions, however, have not been imposed on men. While they have been able to display their appetite as cultural capital, for women, being consumers rather than nurturers has historically been a source of conflict and unease. So I'll start with a quick historical overview of how female appetite has been constructed to trace the power relations behind it and how they have shaped the construction of femininity, to then move to contemporary representations of women eating that question, resist, and challenge this historical construction. So Eve is the first woman to eat in the Christian tradition. From this disobedient act to a divine prohibition was built a discourse around women's claimed inability to resist temptation attributed to their bodily nature. As a consequence, women were required to discipline their appetite by demonstrating a strict self-control. This discourse takes shape in the writings of the Church Fathers. As interpreters of the Old Testament, they sought to identify a culprit who could be punished. That culprit was Eve, and by extension, womankind. The Church Fathers defined gluttony as the cause of humankind's expulsion from paradise, the origin of all other sins, and the gateway to lust. Showing appetite came to be interpreted as a sign of excessive sexual desire that needed to be tamed. In Christian culture, the strategy to do so was fasting. In turn, iconography doubled down on female guilt. From the initial balance between Adam and Eve, by the 16th century, all blame had been placed on her alone, even depicting the snake with female features. Women's relationships with food was thus born under the sign of a complex mechanism composed by different elements that would reappear throughout the centuries in different forms. A prohibition, a transgression, a punishment, a body under suspicion, a watchful authority, a deep fear of female sexual desire, and an obligation to self-control. Beyond the religious sphere, this discourse extended into everyday life through the manuals of good manners, widely circulated among the upper classes in the Middle Ages and the early modern period. These manuals demanded discipline from women at the table: to eat little, drink even less, and behave with modesty, under double surveillance, both their own and that of their husbands, who were responsible for monitoring their conduct. Moreover, it was women themselves who were expected to pass on this discipline to their daughters as part of gender socialization. For women, the rules of etiquette were not merely a matter of courtesy, but a mechanism for controlling their desire. To show appetite at the table was severely condemned and feared, as it was interpreted as a sign of sexual availability. Moderation became essential for preserving one's honor and for aspiring to a good marriage. Throughout the 19th century, manuals on good manners and literature for young ladies insisted on the need to restrain one's appetite in public, to the point of teaching them how not to take pleasure in food or even encouraging them to eat in secret. An extreme case was Victorian England. Food and femininity were so closely linked that restrictive eating was promoted in order to achieve an aesthetic ideal, that is, the ideal of femininity. Abstemious eating was presented as insurance against ugliness and loss of love. As Bramber has argued, appetite is a voice, a bodily language that translated the impact of sociocultural forces upon female identity. In the 20th century, this discourse found new circulation means in fashion, mass culture, and new disciplinary techniques in the form of diets and exercise. With the triumph of consumer society, the thin body was established as the ideal of beauty and as a model of social and erotic romantic success for women, and moreover, as a health standard within medical discourse. So both the aesthetic and the medical discourses shape what we now refer to in critical terms as diet culture, a belief system that equates thinness with health and moral virtue. The term gained popularity in the 21st century alongside concepts such as fat phobia and body shaming. Both make visible the ongoing rejection of fat bodies, while at the same time reclaiming bodily diversity and exposing the historical stigmatization of fatness, especially female fatness. So this historical overview shows that the control of female appetite, which is in essence a control over the body and desire, is a persistent discourse that operates on multiple levels, moral, aesthetic, or medical, and that has evolved over the centuries, changing in form but maintaining the same disciplinary logic. We are dealing with a discourse of heteropatriarchal power, which assigns different meanings and demands different behaviors on the basis of gender. This power, according to Michel Foucault, is a biopower. It penetrates bodies, is internalized by subjects, and aims to govern their behaviors and desires, producing docile bodies that are useful to the system of power, which is the function of disciplinary regimes. For this to happen, social mechanisms of surveillance and punishment are set in motion. Mechanisms, as we have seen, related to the visibility of behavior, which establish norms of conduct, classifying what is normal and what is anomalous. The result of these techniques is the production of subjectivity. Through biopower, obedient or normal subjects are constituted, and by contrast, so are deviant subjects. These techniques of control are also aimed at producing a specific femininity, one that is functional to a heteropatriarchal order. In this process, ideas about what the proper appetite for a woman should be, little or known, become aligned with ideas about what the proper body should be in size and shape, the thin body, which becomes the normative and socially acceptable one. So a body beautiful for the aesthetic discourse, healthy for the medical discourse, and desirable for the male gaze. Susan Bordo argues that the constant regulation of women's hunger functions as a daily practice of self-restraint, teaching women the very meaning of femininity. In this way, the lack of appetite becomes a gender marker, a naturalized sign of normative femininity, and thinness turns into the visible manifestation of discipline. As we have seen, a recurring thread within the discourse addressed to women who show appetite is that they risk their respectability and their chance of being married or loved. Female singleness, represented as a failure, has operated as a symbolic warning crystallized in the archetype of the spinster. From this perspective, the control of appetite, what a woman eats, how much, where, and when, becomes a privileged space for the normalization and exclusion of normative femininity. Yet, of course, we cannot assume that women throughout these centuries accepted this discourse uncritically. Where there is power, there is resistance, and therefore, the responses would have had to be diverse, from rejection to acceptance to transgression. So I would like now to turn to contemporary culture and to the ways in which different women authors dialogue with this legacy from their own perspectives. I will focus on 3 examples from art, audiovisual fiction, and literature, all of which portray women eating, to explore how their works question, resist, and challenge this historical construction. But the American painter Lee Price, in her series Women and Food, brings to the foreground women eating alone, almost always in self-portraits. Prices uses an unusual overhead perspective that gives the viewer the sense of spying on something secret, like a voyeur. Sometimes her figures avoid the viewer's eyes, other times they stare back. The spaces in which they eat are equally unconventional, not tables or restaurants, but places such as the bed, linked with intimacy and pleasure, or the bathroom, linked with elimination and eating disorders. If for centuries women have been forced to hide their appetite, Price reveals it to us. For if female appetite has remained hidden, how can we know what it looks like? How does a woman eat? With joy and pleasure, or with compulsion? The shift in perspective happens not only in the viewer, but also in the woman who eats. Price's works challenge the trope of the sexualized woman who eats for the male gaze and that of the single woman who replaces sex with food. From being the object of another desire, the portrayed woman becomes the subject of her own. In her statement, Price uses the expression coming out of the closet, a problematic phrase, yet a profoundly political one. By making visible something that normally remains hidden, Price politicizes female appetite and redefines the act of eating as a gesture of autonomy and pleasure, one that is not free from conflict nor from the shadow of eating disorders. So if Price paintings make visible something that had long remained hidden, in contemporary audiovisual fiction, this visibility is far more contradictory. Lorelei Gilmore, Liz Lemon, or Elizabeth Gilbert are characters who openly display their appetite, defying expectations of feminine moderation and bodily discipline. They exemplify what Davidowski has termed overeating seen women. For them, eating in public with pleasures appears empowering. Yet this empowerment is deceptive. These women can be seen eating precisely because their bodies align with patriarchal standards of beauty and desirability. Besides being thin, they are white, heterosexual, and successful. Their privilege allows them to satisfy their appetite without consequences. Women who lack this privilege or who do not please the male gaze would be punished for showing the same behavior. In this way, female appetite remains subject to patriarchal culture. It is only tolerated as long as it doesn't threaten the equation thin, beautiful, desirable, so as long as it doesn't disturb the male gaze. Therefore, showing their appetite does not bring empowerment. Only those who already have power can afford to do so. Their supposed empowerment seems closer to powerlessness, as the famous cool girl monologue recited by Rosamund Pike in Gone Girl makes clear. While eating a hamburger, Amy lists the requirements of the cool girl: sexy but never demanding, fun but never confrontational, with a good appetite, yet eternally thin. Her monologue exposes, on the one hand, the patriarchal demand that women pretend to have a carefree relationship with food while secretly dieting, and on the other hand, its consequences, the loss of identity that result from shaping oneself according to male desire. So I would like to conclude with literature by returning to where I began, to the sentence from Supper Club, with which its protagonists inaugurate their secret society. So the characters create the Supper Club to eat together with wild abandon, deliberately breaking with etiquette and patriarchal norms of discretion and moderation. The Supper Club is born as a collective, political, and artistic project, a kind of room of their own. Their bodies stop being objects to control and become sources of pleasure. Eating is visible, uninhibited, sensory, a shared and joyful experience. Joy finally appears in the relationship between women and food. The most radical gesture in the novel is the protagonist's conscious decision to gain weight. Taking up more space with their bodies defies the cultural mandate to make themselves small. And in doing so, they expose the social grammar of fat phobia. Their bodies are received with hostility once they step outside: insults, disapproving looks, unwanted advice, pathologization. They become public bodies which everyone feels entitled to comment on. The social cost of having made themselves visible is really high. So the supper club, created as a space for pleasure, autonomy, and transgression, also worked as a safe space. But this space soon reveals itself as problematic. Inside the club, the women and their bodies have been transformed, but outside, nothing has changed. The space they have created becomes, once again, a place of seclusion for appetite, a place to consume in secret. I think that to problematize the existence of the club doesn't mean to deny the value of its creation. Its birth reveals the high degree of bodily and vital restriction experienced by its founders. But at the same time, it maintains the division between the space where women can express themselves as they wish and the outside world that doesn't allow them to do so. To conclude, and as we have seen by opposing a historical narrative of secrecy and moderation, these representations challenge enduring narratives linking femininity with food control and reimagine women's relationship to food, desire, and public space as forms of active, desiring subjectivity, yet ones that are not free from conflict, tensions, and contradictions. Thank you very much for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you, Maura. That was brilliant. Thank you. If anyone does have any questions for Maura, please